Welcome back everyone to Scruffy Tales. Hopefully we'll get okay audio with this video. We'll see if I manage that. So let's head down to Ukraine and see what's going on. Just a heads up before we continue. I started out with this video last night, but got too tired to finish it, so went to bed. So the plan was to have it uploaded on the 18th, which did not happen. So the maps are from the 18th. Yes, you know. But overall, I think they're somewhat accurate still. Things might have happened, obviously. Both sides are attacking back and forth, but overall, I think we'll still be able to manage with what I've got. So let's get into it. Right, so to give you an idea what we're gonna be talking about, we have the northern front marked in red. That is where Russia is conducting its own counteroffensive to counter Ukraine's counteroffensive. A lot of counters going on, in other words, but that's the northern front. And we have the central front, that is Bakhmut and Donetsk, marked yellow, because I think they primarily were intended as diversions by Ukraine, but might have evolved into something else by now. Then we have the southern front, marked in blue. That is obviously where Ukraine is making their grand attempt to reach the Azov Sea and kick Russia out of the south of Ukraine. Also marked with green, my own little theory about Polohy. And Ukraine might actually be going after Polohy rather than Tokmak, but we'll get into that later on. Moving west to Kherson, we have the western front. It's not so much of a front, to be honest. Ukraine crossed the Dnieper River at apparently 2 locations by now. So we have the Antonov Bridge, where they're still holding on and fighting, and Russia's trying to kick them out. And then they make the second crossing just to piss off Russia. So we'll take a look at that later on as well. And in the far south, it's not a front as such, but it is, of course, Crimea and Ukraine's incursions into Russian-occupied Crimea, and letting the Russians know that they're not safe anywhere in any territory that used to be part of Ukraine. Right, so we're starting off with the northern front. The Russian attack that I have called in previous videos the Russian Gambit. And a gambit is it's a gamble, basically. Russia realized that Ukraine was gonna be attacking all out in the south, so they might have planned to exploit this and try and outmaneuver Ukraine by attacking themselves in the north, far away from the main Ukrainian forces in the south. And we've seen a lot of the numbers floating around lately, such as 100,000 Russian troops, 900 tanks, which is more than likely 900 armored vehicles of various sorts, and including 500 artillery pieces and 400 rocket systems. So, whatever the case, Russia has a lot of troops, and they have a lot of capability in the north. And for myself as a Swede, and any Swedes watching this, what is interesting is that it appears that the previous rumors of CV90s being at Bakhmut were completely wrong. I might have misunderstood some headline or something. I don't remember why exactly I locked on to Bakhmut there, but since then we have learned that the CV90s are more than likely right now in the north outside of Kreminna fighting the current Russian counterattack. So it appears as if CV90s are currently holding the line against the Russian onslaught in the north. And here we have the northern front, far up in the north, close to the border to Russia proper. And that, of course, makes it easy for Russia to bring in supplies, reinforcements, and whatever they need to keep this fight going, unlike the rest of the front line. So it makes perfect sense for Russia to attack up here. Ukraine is attacking in the south, and Russia has short logistical routes into Russia itself. So yeah, wasn't a massive surprise that Russia was gonna try anything up here, to be honest. And Ukraine has obviously known about these 100,000 troops for a long time, for months. They just don't drop out of nowhere. And Russia has been attacking along this front line for about a month now. So it's been an ongoing fight for a month, and before that it was the Russian offensive, obviously. So the Ukraine was not surprised by this. They were prepared, they were ready. The question is if they have enough troops to hold the line, but we'll see what happens in a couple of weeks, I guess. We should also remember that the 100,000 Russian troops, that's just not only infantry. You got people working logistics, people in the support system, truck drivers, and vehicle crews driving all the vehicles, artillery crews. That's like 10 or 12 guys minimum per gun. And then you have infantry. You have officers working the command posts and everything, and their staff, and people working for the staff of the commanders and so on. So it's not 100,000 infantrymen. Maybe 20,000, 30,000 at most, probably, if 100,000 is correct. So it's not a horde of incoming Russians up in the north. There's a lot of them, obviously, but most will be working behind the front line, supporting the troops trying to breach the Ukrainian defenses. So where is Russia attacking? Well, they have three main points of attack. Up in the north towards Kupiansk, in the center out of Svatove, and they've been attacking out of Svatove since New Year's and made very little headway, but right now they've taken some ground with this new increased effort they've made the last couple of days. And of course in the south out of Kreminna, also that line has been static. They made some gains during their own offensive during the winter and spring, but then it's halted. They've gained a couple of 100 meters now over the last couple of days or weeks. So, but these are the three main attack points from Russia in the north. So what do they hope to gain by this? Well, either there are two theories, I guess. One is that they're just applying pressure to force Ukraine to move troops up to the north from the south to weaken the Ukrainian offensive in the south. Another theory is that Russia is, conducting an all-out offensive in order to break through Ukrainian lines and grab territory. Either way, Russia needs to threaten Ukraine. If it's only to force Ukraine to allocate troops, they need to be a threat. If Ukraine is holding the line, then they're fine. Then they don't need any more reinforcements, basically. So Russia needs to be a threat. They need to gain ground. They need to push Ukraine back, and they need to destroy Ukrainian vehicles. In order for Ukraine to feel the need to shift, we need to allocate more troops to the north. We have to take them from the south and move them up north. So even if it's just a feint, a diversion, Russia still needs to gain ground in order to force Ukraine to move in more troops, so to speak. Which is why I think that Russia is probably actually trying to make some gains up here in the north. And I pointed it out in a video of mine from the 26th of June. As you can see, even back then I marked the exact same territories where Russia is now attacking out of, because they were attacking out of the same locations back then. Basically, in the north, they're trying to reach Kupiansk to cut off a vital supply line to the front line that will allow Russia to attack out of Swatobe and then link up with the forces in the north. And in the south, out of Kreminna, they try to reach the first river, and then they can push out towards Lyman, and then use the Oskil River and the Oskil Reservoir, a massive lake, as a natural boundary to help them hold the territorial gains they've made. So if they push out to the large river here, the Oskil River, they can then use the river as a natural barrier to help them hold on to the territory they've gained. So I think this is what they're after, if they manage to push through the Ukrainian lines, that is. Now, I've seen people ask the question why they're making this attack up north when Ukraine is attacking in the south. The question being, wouldn't it be better to move troops down south to hold the Ukrainians at bay, so to speak? And there is some logic to Russia attacking in the north. I previously mentioned it's shorter logistical routes for them. I even marked some of them here on the map. So it's easier for Russia to fight a battle in the north compared to the south. It's also, if you're attacking, you're active. You're taking initiative. If Russia were to allocate troops to the south just to hold the line, that means they're inactive. They're not showing initiative, and they are only reacting to Ukraine. That means Ukraine dictates what is going on along the entire front line, and that is not good for morale. It's not good for propaganda, and well, since you're not attacking, you risk losing ground, you risk losing troops, you risk losing equipment, which of course means you risk losing the war. So that is why I think this is not simply a feint. I think this is an actual attempt by Russia to gain ground and push Ukraine back. They're trying to outmaneuver the Ukrainians in the north. And because they are acting, they are taking the initiative, and they are creating positive propaganda that they can use against Ukraine, that they can use against their enemies around the world, that can show to anyone doubting Russia that look at this, we're actually gaining ground. We are killing and defeating Ukrainians. They walked into our trap. We're holding the line in the south. They're not making any headway, while we are now pushing into Ukrainian territory in the north. And like I said, the north is the best place for Russia to make this happen. The logistical routes are shorter. They can always bring in more troops, always bring in more fuel, more ammunition, more vehicles, of whatever Cold War decade they were now modern, but never mind that. So it makes sense for Russia to make this move in the north, which is why I think this is more than a simple feint or diversion. I think they're actually trying to make some territorial gains here and push Ukraine back. And it's not the 100,000 troops that makes me think this. It is the 900 vehicles, armored vehicles. That includes tanks, fighting vehicles, armored transports, and so on. And they are then in turn backed up by 500 artillery pieces and 400 rocket systems. That's not a force you just, shrug your shoulders at. That's a capable force that can deal out a lot of punishment. So I'm thinking Russia they're gonna step this up probably more and more, and hopefully Ukraine is prepared for it and has set up traps and ambushes, and Russia will just walk into it and get obliterated. But we'll see what happens. So let's take a closer look at the Russian operation in and around Kupiansk, the strike from the north. And of the three Russian operations going on here on the northern front, it is the most northern operation that we're going to be taking a look at. And Russia has made some gains, not much, but still. You can see here on the 17th, this patch of wood up here was in Ukrainian hands, and on the 18th it was in Russian control. Russia still has some ways to go. The woods here, they have about 5 kilometers of woodlands to cover before they can truly threaten the towns to the south. And what they probably want to do is move into the towns and cut off the highway here, leading from Kupiansk to Petropavlivka, and then onward to the front line down at Svatove, and in so doing making it difficult for Ukraine to supply the troops on that front line. And we're gonna move in on a tactical overview of Lyman, the town in the woods here in the north that is under Russian control, and take a closer look at the territory that Russia just now has gained control over. So on the left you can see the territory that Russia moved in to secure. It was Ukrainian until a couple of days ago, but now it's Russian. And as you can see, they moved in here and taken the woods, and there seems to be a belt between the Russian and Ukrainian lines. I marked it here with green. And we're gonna take a closer look at this area here because it appears to have become some sort of no man's land between between both forces. So yeah, we're gonna zoom in. And as we can see, north and south of this area is proper forests. But in between here seems to be, I don't know what it is. Is it fresh forest growing up after having been cut down? What is? I don't know. But well, we can clearly tell that it's not proper forests. And it's probably hard to move vehicles across without being spotted, so if they're gonna cross here, it's probably gonna be with infantry. The question is how they're gonna be doing this. I'm a bit unsure if this is territory you want to cross at all, to be honest. This might actually just be similar to the open fields and farmlands to the south. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight this area that seems to be separating Ukraine and Russian troops right now here in this area, because it's, I don't know what it is, to be honest, but by the looks of it, it's not proper forests, and you're probably pretty dead if you walk out into it, I assume. Alright, so we're moving on to Svatove and Russia's strike from the west. And of the 3 Russian operations in the northern front, it's the one in the middle that we're gonna be taking a look at right now. And as you can see, Russia has made minor gains for the past 2 weeks. Not much going on at all. Like I've said, they've been trying to get through here all the year, but made very little headway. But by the looks of it, they've finally made some gains here around Novoselivsky, and even down by this town here, Novodyany, or whatever it's called. And but as you can see, they're still got quite a ways to go to reach the Oskil River and the Oskil Reservoir. So if it took them, I don't know, 7-8 months to gain a couple hundred meters around Novoselivsky, yeah, they won't be reaching the river anytime soon, so Russia really needs to step up their game if they're gonna push through here. But it all depends on what goes on in the north around Kupiansk, right? If they can push in Kupiansk, then the defenses around Novoselivsky might suffer for it. So Russian troops coming in from Svatove might then in turn have an easier time pushing west towards the Oskil River. So let's take a closer look at Novoselivsky and what Russia has been able to pull off around that town. So looking to the south of Novoselivsky, they've actually managed to push Ukraine back a couple of hundred meters. By the looks of it, they have followed these tree lines and forced Ukraine back away from the main highway, and yeah, so it's open field. So I don't think they've been, they're not fighting out in the middle of the fields. So it's probably Russia has pushed hard into the tree lines here and forced Ukraine back. North of Novosibirsk, Russia has pushed Ukraine out of this big forest. Ukraine is located west of the road, and they had held on to the edge of the forest here for quite some time, but Russia appears now to have made a big push and gained control of the entire forest, which means they now control the road here leading into Novosibirsk from the north. And taking a look at the town itself, you can see here around 10 days ago they were on the outskirts of the town. They had made some gains into the woods surrounding the town, but as of now they have actually pushed all the way into town. They are now in the warehouses here. They are holding this train station, and they've taken control of these tree lines. And Ukraine has actually been pushed back quite a ways here. They used to control the entirety of the town and the tree line around the highway, but that appears now to be contested, which means it means that Ukraine is not in control here of this massive forest here around the railway. And if we take a closer look at the railway and that forest, we can see here the warehouses that Russia is now in control of, the train station that they've taken control of. And it's about 60 meters across from the warehouses to the tree line. And yes, you can run that distance, but I mean, if you were in full gear, you got a machine gun, ammunition, and maybe even a grenade launcher, that you don't want to run 60 meters, you know. So if Russia has managed to cross the railroad and that open territory, that means they might have gained a foothold in that tree line if they're able to contest the buildings and the town to the west of the trees here and the highway. So I don't think that's not looking good for Ukraine. If Russia has managed to find ways to cross this open area here around the railroad between the warehouses and the train station and the forests, that I think Russia might actually have gained a foothold in this tree line, and Ukraine is struggling to keep them away from the highway, basically. Okay then, moving on to operational overview of Kreminna, the strike from the south. And as you can see, it's the operation to the far south here of the three Russian attacks along the northern front line. And I mean, you can see here, it's taken Russia, a month to gain just a couple of 100 meters here and there. They're struggling. Russia is having a hard time pushing through the woods here. Although there were a couple of reports that Russia had actually pushed all the way into Torske and Sarichin. Torske is a town right next to Sarichin here. Across the fields, it's not unthinkable. It's only 3 kilometers, so I mean, it's doable. But Russia has tried for a year to make it across the fields towards Sarichin, and the lines have been static. Nothing's been going on, and then all of a sudden they made it all the way up to Sarichin. I don't know. I doubt it. They might have made an attempt, maybe, but I don't think they made it all the way up there. It appears, though, that they are trying to push into the forests here to the south, and to avoid the wide open fields of the farmlands, which makes sense. You know, in the forest there's cover, they can maneuver without being spotted and all that. But even that, they're having trouble. They've only gained a couple of 100 meters here and there, like I said. And but we're actually gonna be moving on to a topic that I think many Swedes watching this will find very interesting, because it is in this area, the Kreminna region, where we possibly will be seeing CV90s fighting on the front line. We are gonna focus a bit on the 21st Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Army, because according to author Lars Wildereng, the 21st Mechanized Brigade is the Ukrainian unit that has received the CV90s. And if that is the case, then they are holding the line against the Russian onslaught to the south, right outside of Kreminna. Which is interesting, so we're gonna take a look at that right now. I just want to highlight how insane the modern world is, modern technology, because Wildereng released a tweet about that it was the 21st Mechanized Brigade that had the CV90s. And then I found this site called Military Land, and they list the locations of, you know, every unit in the Ukrainian army. I don't know how accurate it is. It can't be accurate, can it? That would be horrifying if that's the case. But I mean, some of these brigades, some of these units, they have Facebook pages. What the hell? It's insanity. So anyway, thanks to the internet, and thanks to a tweet, and thanks to, I guess, Ukrainian soldiers posting pictures online, Military Land can now, you know, place the 21st Mechanized Brigade in a relative area where it's operating. So all in all, we can now guesstimate this magical word guesstimate, that CV90s are fighting in the woods outside of Kreminna, right? So you have Zarechne, you have Kreminna, you have Military Land highlighting the 21st Mechanized Brigade right on the front line, and a author, Lars Wildereng, has some contacts in Ukraine, and he knows that CV90s are fighting for the 21st Mechanized Brigade. Voila, here they are. And this is the terrain that the CV90s probably is fighting in. Slightly to the north, outside of Debrova, Russia has made some gains, taking ground. And the 21st Mechanized Brigade has been located to the woods here along the Donetsk-Luhansk Oblast border, in this forest, and this is probably where the CV90s are conducting combat, holding the front line, facing a Russian advance towards Zarechne and the vital bridges across the river over there. Amazing. I mean, the modern world is terrifying. You can find information about anything. Chances are it's not correct, but still, this is the most accurate information we got at the moment. So I know I said Bakhmut in previous videos, that's all wrong, and who knows, a week from now this might be wrong as well, right? So this is what we got at the moment. When I reported that they were at Bakhmut, that was, I think, what was said back then. It's how I interpreted at the time, and this is how I'm interpreting things at the moment. So yeah, crazy world, but here they are, probably fighting in this area. Next, we're gonna move on to Bakhmut. We're not gonna take a look at the entire front line, the central front line. Just gonna take a look at the operational overview of Bakhmut itself, because what's going on outside of Donetsk is not all that interesting, if you ask me. But things seems to be happening around Bakhmut that deserves a closer look. And of course, Bakhmut, this famous city, now demolished and obliterated and flattened, is located right here, south of Kreminna, south of the location where the CV90s are fighting. You can see Donetsk as well. Russia and Ukraine is trading territory back and forth around Donetsk, around a town called Avdiivka. But I'm not gonna focus on that at all. We're gonna move straight for Bakhmut. So I've said since the beginning of the offensive that Ukraine attacking Bakhmut is a diversion. And the reason is that Bakhmut is significantly more important for Russia than for Ukraine, in that it was Russia's only real victory during their winter-spring offensive, and they spent months and thousands of lives taking the city, so they won't allow it to fall. They just won't. So if Ukraine threatens Bakhmut, Russia will just make sure that they keep sending in troops to hold it. Because if they lose Bakhmut, it is catastrophic for Russia, for the war effort, for the propaganda. But of course, a diversion, yes, you apply pressure to threaten the enemy, but what happens if you manage a breakthrough? Even if it's only a diversion, what do you do if you force the enemy to flee? You must have a goal, you must have objectives, just in case you actually succeed in pushing through the enemy lines. And that is what it appears that Ukraine is facing right now in and around Bakhmut. And I'll admit, I am a bit surprised at what we're being told of the ongoings around Bakhmut, because Ukraine, they're pushing in on several fronts here. They are pushing in around Klishivka, at Andrivka, at Berkivka. They're taking ground up around Minkivka, and they're currently pushing in from the north towards Soledar and Yakovlivka. It's just incredible. And these attacks are all focused on a couple of strategic locations that are very vital, and we'll take a closer look at that now. Because take a look at here, we're gonna highlight Soledar, Krasnohora, and Chasiv Yar and Kurdyamivka. Take a look at these towns as we move on to the next map. Right, here you have the towns I pointed out before: Soledar, Krasnohora, Chasiv Yar, Kurdyamivka, all around Bakhmut. And you have here the blue circles are where Ukraine has pushed in and secured territory. And the green one here outside of Chasiv Yar, they've held on to that territory all along. Up here we have a purple circle that appears to be where Ukraine is attempting to go. And what do they have in common? Well, most of them at least. Well, they're hills, high ground. As you can see here, they're taking the high ground all around Bakhmut, and the hill here outside of Chasiv Yar, they held on to that all along. It has allowed them to move in to the valley here at Krasnohora, though, potentially to cut off Bakhmut from the north. And up around Soledar, it appears that Ukraine is trying to reach the big hill over here in the purple circle. Difficult word, apparently, circle. And so yeah, and what does there's been all this talk of fire control. Ukraine can now fire at the supply lines leading into Bakhmut, and I guess that's partially true. More importantly, though, the hills allows them to fire at Bakhmut. It allows them to fire at the outskirts of the city where Russia has their first lines of defense. So if they're making a move on Bakhmut and Russians open fire from the buildings, then Ukraine knows, okay, that building needs to be destroyed. And then they can either sit on a hill and guide the artillery until they hit spot on and bring the building down, or they just bring up tanks or other vehicles and use direct fire to hit the exact correct window that needs to be hit. Yeah, so that's what the hills are important for. Attacking supply lines, I don't know. I think the hills here are going to be more crucial for hitting buildings inside of Bakhmut. Except for the hill down here at Kupiansk and up around Soledar, obviously. Those hills might actually be vital for cutting Bakhmut off from supplies. I'll give you that much. So yeah, like I said, has a diversion turned into a full-blown offensive? I mean, Bakhmut is extremely important for Russia, and if Bakhmut falls, Russia can't spin it in any other way except that it is a complete disaster. And like I said before, from Ukraine's perspective, this operation, this attack towards Bakhmut was probably from the beginning a diversion. But they have made important gains. They have taken vital hills surrounding Bakhmut. And the question is, will Ukraine try and use that to just, go all in and just keep going while they have the initiative? And the next question is, obviously, will Russia respond the way they have to? Will they let Ukraine surround Bakhmut, or will they just pile in troops to prevent that from happening? And if they do that, does that mean they take troops from other places, other front lines? I mean, say around Kreminna a couple of days ago, or was it a couple of weeks ago, we heard rumors that Russia had moved elite paratroopers from Kreminna down to the Bakhmut area, for instance. So, this full-blown offensive up onto the hills around Bakhmut might still serve the purpose of the diversion. We'll see. So, I mean, just take a look at the map here. You can see where Ukraine has pushed in, and they're moving for the high ground, and they are seriously being a threat to Bakhmut right now. A couple of days ago, a week ago, I was very skeptical that any of this would actually become something of significance, but it has. And Ukraine can now either attack Bakhmut itself, or they can move in and start surrounding it, and maybe even up here in the north, move in on Soledar and Krasnohorad. I mean, it's still towns, it's still urban fighting. It's not going to happen in a day or two, but in a couple of weeks, a couple of months, who knows? Bakhmut might be completely surrounded, and Ukraine might actually begin to push into the city itself, which would be incredible. I mean, what a complete disaster for Russia if that happens. Which is why I think Russia will probably just throw in everything they have, and other front lines will suffer for it. Well, we should remember that Ukraine has spent a month trying to make these gains. We must not forget that they've spent a month climbing up on top of these hills, fighting over farmlands and tree lines. And now, if they're going to make headway now, they're going to have to enter into towns. They're going to have to push into Klishivka. They're going to have to push into Kurdimivka, Berkivka, Yahidne, Soledar, Yakovlivka, possibly even Bakhmut itself. And it took them a month to take a couple of 100 meters, maybe a kilometer here and there, of farmland. It's gonna take much, much longer fighting building to building, street by street in these towns, if the Russians are committed to defending, that is. Who knows, maybe morale is low and they're out of ammo, they're out of food, and they're willing to surrender, who knows. But generally speaking, assaulting buildings, that is going to be much, much harder than trying to fight your way through a couple of fields, unfortunately. So this fight around Bakhmut, it's not over, not by a long shot. Next up, Southern Front. Ukraine is on the offensive. They're making tremendous gains, and the question is if Russian lines are beginning to falter. So, getting our bearings, this is the Southern Front line. We moved from the red northern to the yellow central, and now down to the blue and green Southern Front. And as you can tell, we have a couple of locations where Ukraine has made advances, significant advances, and it's looking really good, not gonna lie. Ukraine is making a lot of gains, and I've highlighted Polohy with green because that is my personal theory. No clue if it holds any merit at all, but I'm thinking that Ukraine wants to attack Polohy rather than going for Tokmak, but that's just me. So let's take a closer look at what's going on here. We're gonna start off with Velika Novosilka, the Ukrainian Thunderblitz, as I called it in previous videos, before we realized that this was gonna be a slow advance. So yeah, Thunderblitz not happening. But I think Ukraine is pushing for the Azov Sea through Velika Novosilka. But they have tough defenses ahead of them. But on a positive note, the assault of Staromayorsky has begun. So Velika Novosilka is located here to the east on the southern line, front line, and close to Volodar as well, where Ukraine has actually made some gains recently. So I'm going to include that in the Velika Novosilka section. First off, why I think Ukraine is attacking out of Velika Novosilka? Well, it's because of this here highway, the TO518. It goes straight from Novosilka. Sorry, I don't know. I can't talk straight for some reason tonight. It goes from Ukrainian held territory all the way down south to the Azov Sea. And it seems that, Ukraine might actually be interested in securing this highway, and that is why they're attacking out of the towns they're attacking from. So I initially figured that they were going for a Thunder Blitz. I still think that was what they were after, but then Ukraine and everyone else realized that, oh shit, there's not one mine in the way here. There's like a million mines. We can't drive through this. And so rude wake-up call for Ukrainian soldiers and the rest of the world looking on. But I think the original plan was to break through the Russian lines and then make a thunder run as far south as possible without overextending, forcing Russia to adjust to having enemy troops deep within their own lines, behind their own lines. And Ukraine would then fan out and conduct the classic blitzkrieg encirclements along the entire section of the front line here. And so that would be the Thunder Blitz, which obviously no longer is possible because, they can't thunder run their way through anything at the moment. Instead, what they have been doing is, they moved down through Neskuchne, Blaudatne, and Makarivka, and that's where things came to an abrupt end as they were reaching Urushaina and Staromayorsky. Staromayorsky is right next to Urushaina here. And that was a month ago. And they've been fighting in and around Makarivka ever since. Before we move on with that, I just want to point out on the right here we have a blue circle. That is territory Ukraine recently gained, right next to Volodar. They made a push over there. Was a bit surprised to see that, but yeah, that happened. Moving back to Makarivka and Staromayorsky, so Ukraine got stuck on their push south along the main highway, and couldn't get anywhere. So what did they start to do? Well, they began to moving up on the high ground, up onto the hills here around Rivnopil, and that's what they've been doing for a month. I am not joking. For a month, Ukraine has been slowly but surely making gains up on the hills and the high ground here between Makarivka and Rivnopil, and even further west around Novodarivka and towards Priutny here. And eventually they managed to push Russia back, and Russia fell back to another tree line across another farm field, another field, and another field. And now Ukraine has reached a point where they have pushed Russia back so far that they can actually attack Staromayorsky itself. And we're going to take a tactical look at Staromayorsky, and I just want to point out that on the 15th of June I posted a video that I called The Next Battle, the Liberation of Staromayorsky, because that is what seemed to be the obvious next step. They had taken Makarivka and Staromayorsk was next. That was a month ago. We've waited a month for that to happen, and it just goes to show that Russian defenses are tough to break. So Ukraine could not attack Staromayorsk head on. They actually had to go around up on the high ground, and we're now gonna take a look at that. So sorry for the images, it's a bit mashed together here, but I hope you can bear with me here. So to begin with, I want to point out what links the images here. We have a yellow dotted line on the satellite image here. That is a road that is also marked on the other two maps. The black dotted line here and the black dotted line here. They're the same road, so we have a point of reference. Another point of reference is the tree line here and the farm right next to it, as well as the Russian fortifications, the trench lines they've built in the tree line. So these are our points of reference on the maps. As you can see, Russia has retreated away from the hills, away from the farms, and Ukraine is actually contesting part of the town of Staromayorsk. As we can see, the warehouses here on the outskirts, and even some of the residential buildings here right on the edge of town. And how is that possible? Why isn't Russia in complete control of the town? Because as you can see, Ukraine appears to be quite a ways from the town itself. Well, if we take a look at the topography map here, we can see that Ukraine is not that far away from the road, the bend in the road. And that bend in the road is right next, well, basically almost on top of the hill. And Ukraine is on top of that hill. Ukraine, more than likely, is able to fire straight into town. And they have pushed, I suspect, the Russians back from these buildings on the outskirts of town. They were probably hiding in the warehouses, but Ukraine can now guide artillery and fire directly with tanks and other vehicles at these buildings, including the residential buildings down here. So Russia has been forced away from these buildings. They are not in control of them. Same thing goes for the tree line up here. Russia is no longer in control of the entire length of the tree line because Ukraine can fire from the hills down into the trees. And so what is happening? Well, if Ukraine is applying pressure on the outskirts of town with indirect fire and direct fire, that means Ukraine could charge downhill into the town with vehicles. If that's possible. I don't know how many mines are surrounded the town, but because we also heard rumors that Ukraine is inside of Staromayorsk already, fighting in the center of town. So if that's true or not, I don't know, but it appears as if Ukraine gained the high ground and then were able to fire straight into the town, into the Russian defensive positions. Like I said, they're now able to do around Bakhmut, right? So this is Bakhmut in miniature. Ukraine took a hill. They can now see the outskirts of the town and they can shoot at Russian defenses defending the edge of town. Russia falls back because they are not safe in those locations, because they're being pounded by Ukrainian guns, and Ukraine can now charge basically, because it's a lot of open ground. They can't sneak in. They actually have to rush across the open fields here and charge into a suitable location, dismount troops, and gain a foothold. So I think that's what's going on, and according to reports, Ukraine is trying to push further into Staromayorsky here, fighting building to building and street by street. So, is this proof that Russian lines are collapsing, or is Russia simply falling back as they see the need for it? Hard to tell. I mean, is Russia running out of troops, or have they been pushed to the brink of their abilities? Or is Russia falling back with a plan to consolidate their forces to allow a stiffer resistance? Well, you tell me. It took Ukraine a month to move from Makarivka in around Staromayorsky to reach the very outskirts of that town. That took them a month. And I mean, take a look at this map. After Staromayorsky, you have Savitne Bajanye. Then you have Staromivlivka. Then you have Klitschov. Then you have Olynske and Herchivka, and the Russian main defensive line, located on hills, by the way, surrounding this main highway and the river. So, I don't know, has Russia run out of troops, or are they falling back and just, it's time to defend this position instead? Now it's time to defend this position. I don't know. We're getting reports from Russian generals that are saying that they're not rotating troops sufficiently enough to allow them to rest and stuff like that. So hopefully, Ukraine is applying so much pressure that the Russian lines are beginning to crumble. That you get a cascade effect. That they're falling back. Ukraine falls after. Russia can't set up proper new lines, and they have to fall back again. Ukraine follows, and then everything falls apart, and Ukraine has an open road south. We'll see if that is the case. When Ukraine gains control of Staromayorsky, I think we will be better able to gauge the situation, but we'll have to wait and see. But as you can tell here, Ukraine has a lot of obstacles left before they can breach through any Russian defenses. And next stop, operational overview of Polohy and Robotyne. And Russia pushes Ukraine back at Robotyne, Ukraine making gains north of Polohy. And this is the area we're going to be taking a look at now. I just want to point out that, Russia has, according to my map here, Deep State Map, pushed Ukraine back to the east of Robotyne. That might have changed by now, so just keep that in mind. Things are happening constantly on the front line, so even if I'm saying, oh well, the maps look like this now, things might have changed, in the last hour. Who knows? So keep that in mind. So, top left corner, we have the front line a couple of days ago. You can see I pointed out the 3 important locations. And to the left, the other day, Russia pushed Ukraine back quite significantly. We have 2 trench lines here that are excellent markers to gauge the Russian advances. But what is interesting is that Ukraine, north of Polohy, has made significant gains. First, there's this small push south here in the middle, but take a look over here at what is it, Malinivka? They pushed Russia back a mile 1.5 kilometers, maybe 2 kilometers even. Substantial gains out of nowhere. Because everyone's been talking about Robotyne, right? Robotyne, they're advancing on Robotyne. Oh my god, look at the fighting going on over there. And take a look at this. Boom. Out of left field, or right field in this case. 1.5 to 2 kilometers. Where Russia has been, forcefully been pushed back. Good job, Ukraine. And why have I marked Polohy with green? Well, it is a railroad hub of unlike anything you've seen. There's a railroad coming in from the north, and there's one coming in from the west, from Orikhiv. And the railroad continues to the south, and Polohy is basically a town built around a massive train station. I mean, if I were to zoom in, I've zoomed in previous videos. It is the railroad station is half the town, basically. Insanity. And I think Ukraine wants it because, it would provide them a forward base of operations that they could fortify, and where they could bring in a lot, and I mean a lot, of supplies, manpower, and equipment. So what is the situation here in this section of the front line? We're hearing these reports of Russia is running out of troops. They have no more reserves, and they're not rotating troops. They're low on morale, they're fatigued, shell-shocked, and so forth. And and also, where is Ukraine going with the offensive? What are they trying to achieve? Because it's not going nearly as fast as Ukraine wants, and the world looking on or questioning, wondering what the hell's going on. Why isn't anything happening? So let's take a look. So on Deep State, they have this function for the map where you can see concentrations of Russian forces. They point out that it's not 100% accurate and shouldn't be used for any military operational whatever, but we're gonna use it anyway because I'm a professional military. So is Russia running low on troops? Well, what if they are? What are we seeing? Well, it's a mix of combat units, I guess, with reserves and logistical personnel, support units, and artillery locations, probably. Because, you have here at Velika Novosilka, Polohy, and Vasilivka, that has to be concentrations of frontline troops, right? Chernivka, logistics, artillery maybe, stuff like that. Tokmak, logistics, support, reserves. So it's probably a mix. But, running low on troops, this doesn't look like they're running low on troops. This here is Robotyne, where Ukraine has been trying very hard for over a month to push through. And, well, they're making gains, no doubts about it, but they haven't even reached the main concentration of troops yet. Same for Velika Novosilka. They've struggled for a month to just get up on a hill that is farmland. They haven't even reached the main Russian defensive line here, where all the troops appear to be gathered. Is Russia really running out of troops? I'm not so sure. And, I don't know. We'll see what happens, I guess. But let's move on. Right, everyone talks about Tokmak, that the assault here out of Orikhiv and through Robotyne, and the goal is heading straight for Tokmak. But, is it? Look at all these trench works, all these defensive lines before they can reach Tokmak. Is that the best thing to do? I don't mean to question Ukraine for going after Tokmak. Well, I guess I am. I don't know. Tokmak is important for Russia. It's a logistical hub. By all accounts, there's an important airfield where helicopters can refuel and rearm and attack the front line. So it's vital for Russia, no doubt. But there's a lot of Russians between Orikhiv and Tokmak, and there are plenty of defensive structures between Orikhiv and Tokmak. And, you know, yeah, why do we think Ukraine is moving towards Tokmak? You know, take a look at this. They might as well, for all we know, be heading for Polohy, like I said. Take a look at this. This entire section of the front line is north of Polohy, where they're making gains. And to be honest, the attack at Orikhiv, it's moving more southeast than south or southwest. The advances has been quite clearly southeast, and you know, towards Polohy. Then they've been attacking over here and over here towards Polohy. Now they've been attacking north of Polohy here, gaining 1.5 to 2 kilometers of ground. So I think Polohy is still on the table, to be honest. I mean, what do I know? I'm talking out of my ass, basically. Another theory, I guess, is, are they heading for these two gaps where Russia has no troops? I mean, take a look at this. If they're moving in south from Orikhiv, they seem to be heading straight for the gap, right? Where Russia has no troops. Same thing over here at Huliapole and Vikinovosilka. That could actually be a push towards this massive gap between the Russian troops. Who knows? I don't know. I'm just throwing theories around here. Maybe Tokmak is the final objective here. Who knows? But yeah, you know, just throwing random stupid theories around. Yeah, so enough of stupid stuff like that. We're moving on to the Western Front. Catching the flip side, the Ukrainians crossed the Dnieper River and is threatening Crimea. And of course, we're talking about the Antonov Bridge, where Ukraine got across the river, set up shop beneath the bridge, built a forward base of operations, and started harassing Russia. And Russia responded as you might expect. They went in full force. Apparently there's fighting going on still on that small island where the bridge is located. Ukraine has not been kicked off, and Russia has made sure that they've gotten troops onto the island eventually. And according to rumors, there's a second crossing somewhere. They made another attempt at getting across the river that was successful. So Russia now has to deal with 2 locations, apparently, where Ukraine has a forward base of operations, essentially on the south end of the river here. And, well, why this is a problem for Russia is pretty obvious. If Ukraine gains a foothold south of the river, they can, in the long run, build up a force that could potentially push on south towards Crimea and cut off the 2 vital logistical routes leading from Crimea into the rest of Ukraine. And as you can see here, that alone forces Russia to have a lot of troops on standby here at Kherson, just because of the possibility that Ukraine might actually get across and threaten the supply lines. So the fact that Ukraine has made it across the river, possibly on 2 locations, forces Russia to just move in troops and secure the river as best it can, so Ukraine can't threaten the supply routes leading from Crimea. And that, of course, means the troops that are located here at Kherson, they can't fight up on the southern front, or they can't fight at Bakhmut or anywhere else. So Ukraine, well, they are threatening the Antonov Bridge, and that alone forces Russia to allocate all this manpower, all the supplies, all the equipment, all the ammunition, and everything else to this region. And that makes it easier for Ukraine to achieve their objectives elsewhere along the front line. Okay, so next stop, Crimea. Kerch Bridge, obviously damaged. Russian supply depot goes up in smoke, and Sevastopol got rocked by explosions. And Kerch Bridge, marked here on the map with red arrow and purple circle, down at Crimea. Yeah, so I doubt anyone has missed the fact that Ukraine managed to strike the Kerch Bridge, right? And not insignificant, obviously. It's the only land route from Russia to Crimea. And by disrupting that bridge, it obviously affects the logistics of Russia moving in troops and equipment to Crimea, and from Crimea they then move it on to the front lines, obviously. So yeah, hitting that bridge, I mean, it was inevitable. It would happen again. It's gonna happen again. Ukraine will try and hitting that bridge because it is super vital for the Russian war effort. Funnily enough, as they hit the bridge, Russians on Crimea trying to leave were forced to move north along the main highways, and there was apparently a massive gridlock to north as they tried to escape Crimea and taking the road through Melitopol and Mariupol. Imagine that. So who knows? Maybe that was the plan. I doubt it. I think that was just a very fortunate coincidence, a bonus. But yeah, so that happened. Russia was quick to solve the problem. They repaired it partially, and ordinary cars could then utilize the bridge as normal. Heavy trucks were unable to cross the bridge, obviously, but the ordinary cars could only a couple of hours after the hit drive across the bridge again. And during the day, we saw reports of I'm not sure where on Crimea, but there was an attack against a Russian supply depot, and it was a huge, I mean huge explosion, a giant, and apparently it just kept going as well, as one bomb after the other in this supply depot went off. Excellent attack by Ukraine hitting that Russian supply depot. That's gonna hurt the front lines most definitely. and also Sevastopol, this vital port town and navy base for Russia, was struck by several explosions. And as a response, as I understand it, to Russia attacking Odessa, and we'll get into that a bit later on here. A bit later on in the next segment, we'll be dealing with the attack on Odessa. But so yeah, Crimea is being hit. Kerch Bridge was hit. Military supply depots being targeted, and Sevastopol is being targeted by Ukrainian special forces and people in Crimea loyal to Ukraine, partisans, and the Ukrainian military firing missiles and drones at military targets on Crimea. So Russia is feeling it. Most definitely. There is not a single inch of territory that used to belong to Ukraine where Russians are safe. Let's put it that way. So yeah, here we are, the Odessa attacks, and Russia just showered Odessa with drones and missiles. I mean, absolutely horrible. Is it 30 or 40 missiles that's been launched, something like that? And as a retaliation for the Kerch Bridge, as I understand it. I mean, that's just vile. And the reason, well, it's Odessa is a port town, and you could say it has military significance because of that, just like Kerch Bridge has military significance. The problem is Odessa is obviously used to ship out grain to the rest of the world. It's part of a massive program to supply the poor and starving countries around the world, in Africa and in Asia and so on, and provide them with food. So now that Russia is attacking this port town, Odessa, port city, Odessa, these grain ships, they're stuck. They can't move into port and they can't leave port. So all this food is stuck in Odessa and can't get out to the people that truly needs it. I think it was a German politician or a minister of foreign affairs in Germany, something like that, that said that Russia is not just attacking a Ukrainian city here, they're attacking all the starving people around the world. And I think that's fitting. It's it's not an attack against a military port. It's a deliberate attack against the poor and starving people around the world. I mean, that is just absolutely appalling. Incredible. It's just incredible. And the problem is, historically, this is how things are done. If you look at larger conflicts like World War I, World War II, yes, it's basically a century ago, but the pattern is the same. You attack civilian shipping and civilian ports that has no military importance, but they have a strategical importance nonetheless, because they're bringing in supplies, they're bringing in food, they're maintaining commerce and keeping the enemy war effort going. For instance, during World War I, there was something like 5,000 civilian ships sunk in the Atlantic. Civilian ships bringing in food and supplies to the British, for instance. Incredible. And thousands of American sailors died during World War I without the US entering the war. Incredible numbers. And now this is not a deliberate attack against any civilian ships. We have not reached that point yet, and I hope we don't see that. I hope that if Russia actually attacks a civilian ship full of grain, then that is a signal to the rest of the world that Europe and North America has to get involved and stop Russia at all cost. So that we don't see these same patterns that we've seen in previous wars, where if you're involved in a brutal conflict, then it's okay to start sinking civilian ships. So if Russia is dangerously close to doing that right now as they attack Odessa, it's basically what they're doing. They're killing civilians, obviously, in Ukraine. And they're bombing the city. Yeah, this is how it's been forever. You know, if two countries are at war, civilian ports and civilian ships have been up to now fair game, and I hope that changes, to be honest. A bit of a rant on that previous picture. And here we have the map, of course. We have Crimea, Odessa, and the missiles and drones have been launched from Crimea and from Russian warships. And I mean, if they start sinking ships, civilian ships full of grain, the world has to respond. I can't imagine the world just ignoring that like the world has done in previous conflicts. Then something has to be done. And Russia, well, the world should have done something a long time ago, I guess, with all the war crimes committed by Russia and bombing of cities and what have you. But yeah, this is just vile. I mean, there are poor people around the world who have nothing to do with this conflict, and they are now gonna die. Infants and children are gonna starve to death because Russia is Russia, basically. All right, moving on. That got me depressed, like more than I thought it would. Moving on to Ukrainian assaults and Russian counterattacks, and we're gonna take a look at Ukrainian assault columns and the Ukrainian tactics to bypass Russian minefields, and Russian counter-tactics and how they try to combat the very effective assault columns that Ukraine is sending across the farm fields. And this is based on information provided by Tatarigami on Twitter. So please head on over to his Twitter account and take a closer look at what he can offer in terms of insights and information. It's quite interesting. So what it appears is that Ukraine tries to attack across the open farmlands in columns, following a tree line to close to the tree line to avoid the mines that are scattered across the wide open fields. And they do this in force with tanks and troop transports close together, and they just bum rush down along a tree line to reach the Russian positions at the far end. And there's some video evidence that seems to suggest this. Here we have tanks, Ukrainian tanks, and I believe something MRAP style vehicles, might be Australian Bushmasters, and they're rushing down this field, and they're actually firing into the woods here, into the trenches, as they're moving down the tree lines. Or it's probably Russians holding the trenches here, and Ukraine wants to bypass these trenches and then want to get to the far end of the field, so they suppress the enemy with tanks and machine guns as they roll on by in this all-out assault across the field. And the idea is that Ukraine scouts the Russian lines with recon units and with drones, and they try and locate a weak spot. And when they have found a location where they think they can actually attack, based on the intelligence gathered by reconnaissance and drones, they then launch an all-out assault with these columns of tanks and troop transports, and they rush across the field close to a tree line to avoid the mines out on the field itself. And the idea is that they then reach the far end of the field and crash into the tree line, dismount all the troops, and then they fan out, secure the breach, and then they start clearing the tree line to the sides, and then they can pour in more troops as needed. The problem is that Russia has a counter to this, and that is to move in troops to outflank the Ukrainians as they make the push across the field. And they're not moving across the field like I marked here. They're probably going to be moving in the tree line and set up positions and then wait for the Ukrainians to come. So that means that as Ukraine is pushing across, they enter they basically drive into an ambush, into a kill box, where mortars strike them, where artillery strikes them, where RPGs hit them, where anti-tank guided missiles are fired across the fields at them and stuff like that. So this illustrates why Ukraine has such difficulty in advancing, right? And it also shows why Russia is are able to put up such stiff resistance, right? Because Ukraine has few options in crossing these fields, and Russia has come up with a very simple way of countering the Ukrainian assaults. So basically, what happens is that Ukraine scouts a location where they think they will have a good chance of being able to push across and gain a foothold. So what does Russia do? Well, Russia acknowledges that the Ukrainian tactics, they are effective. They bypass the mines and they move in force against a weak position in the Russian front line, which means Ukraine, if they get across the field, then they will gain a foothold, and then it's going to be difficult to fight them back. So what does Russia do? Well, they will have to, as early as possible, find these Ukrainian assault columns as they assemble. So Russia sends out drones to locate, to spot and locate these assault columns as they are moving into position. That gives Russia a heads up, so they can move their troops into position to set up the ambush and the kill box. Then Ukraine begins their advance across the field, and Russia just waits for the right moment to open fire with everything they have, and Ukraine loses a lot of vehicles in the process. And even if Ukraine is successful, say they get across and they establish a breach and they can then start fanning out. I mean, you can see here they will be surrounded. Russians will be pouring in from every side, and Ukraine has to get across this field that is and roll past this tree line that is probably full of Russians in order to support the breach. And even then, if they succeed and force Russia to fall back, well, then they're going to have to do it all over again, the next tree line, because the next field is going to be full of mines as well. And the next tree line is going to be full of Russians, and they are going to be ready with anti-tank missiles, and they're going to be ready with RPGs, and their artillery is ready to shower you with shells and what have you all over again. So no wonder that this is taking such time, and Ukraine is losing quite a lot of vehicles, and it's obvious why. I mean, they have to attack. Somehow they don't have air power. They can't just bomb the crap out of this location with fighter jets and helicopters. They don't have that. So they have to try and destroy Russian artillery, so Russia can't fire indirectly at these attack columns, and then Ukraine can try and support attack columns with artillery and mortars, trying to hit these narrow tree lines. I mean, and then there's mines, 10,000 mines, 1 million mines all over the place. I mean, Jesus Christ. Yeah, this is gonna take time, obviously, and Ukraine is just gonna have to rinse and repeat, take one field at a time, push across, breach, hope that they can hold, and as they get showered with Russian artillery, Russians are closing in, maybe they can fight them off. If not, they're gonna have to fall back, try again. I mean, hellish. A bit of a doom and gloom here towards the end with Odessa and difficulty of crossing the minefields for Ukraine, but some good news. We're gonna top it off here. Russian generals, they are dropping like flies and or getting fired or removed. I mean, Ukraine has managed to assassinate quite a few of them. High-ranking generals. Some are getting shot point blank as they are out running. Others get a missile on their head, and then you have some generals that have the guts to, tell their superiors how it is, that there are issues on the front line, and those guys are getting removed, getting fired. Incredible. So all in all, it's weakening the Russian war effort. Competent generals are getting killed or getting fired. For some reason, that is how Russia has run their army for centuries. And I don't know, I guess they think it's working for them, so why not continue, right? And artillery attrition. Currently, Russia is losing around 20 to 30 artillery pieces every day, along with vital counter-battery radar systems. And so Ukraine is on purpose right now focusing on taking out Russian artillery. and their counter-battery radar systems. And in order to do it's, I mean, yeah, we read this that, oh yeah, they destroy 20 or 30 every day. That means that they have to, in order to discover these locations, the Russian artillery has to fire, so a Ukrainian counter-battery radar system can locate the artillery rounds coming in and calculate the trajectory to backtrack the trajectory to the location where the Russian gun is, right? So the only way to locate them is if they're firing. And how can you see if they're firing? Well, you have to make them fire, I mean, right? So Ukrainians have to push into Russian lines in order to get Russians to fire. And then you can locate them, and then you can hit them. So Ukrainians have to, run the gauntlet. They have to stick their neck out and go, hey, here I am, and then head for cover as artillery rounds come in. And that means Ukrainian artillery can go, oh, they're over there, let's hit them. So, yeah, just keep that in mind whenever you see these numbers. In order for Ukraine to be able to locate and hit those Russian artillery pieces, some Ukrainian troops on the ground, they have to stick their neck out to get them to shoot. God damn. And as always, the US cavalry comes in towards the end to save the day. I don't know if that's what's happening right now, but it appears as if the US has allowed Ukrainian pilots to train flying the F-16, and European countries that have F-16s available will begin to train Ukrainian pilots in a month or two. So in 6 months maybe, we will see the Ukrainian Air Force taking to the skies, flying a very capable American fighter jet, and equipped with what I assume to be some of NATO's best air-to-air missiles. So the air battle for Ukraine will begin in a couple of months. So we're looking forward to that. And also, currently, Ukrainian crews are training on the American Abrams tank in Germany. And they will soon be ready, if they're not already ready, to deploy to the front line. So in a couple of weeks, I'm guessing we will see the first Abrams flying Ukrainian colors, driving up to the Russian lines and bringing hellfire and brimstone with them. So that's that. That's all I have for you tonight. Again, cranking this armchair general cringe up to 11. And I hope I provided you with something interesting to listen to and to watch. And yeah, Ukraine is making gains in the south. There's no denying it. Russia is falling back. Russia is on the move in the north. Not nearly as impressive as they would like, but still they're making some gains. And yeah, all in all, it's looking good. Soon we will see F-16s in the sky over Ukraine, and that will be a massive game changer. No doubt about it. And so yeah, future projects I have in store is doing a remake of one of my first videos, JDX1. So I can use a better microphone with it, detailing a couple of Swedes taking part in a UN mission in the Congo fighting communist cannibals. Yes, you heard that right, communist cannibals, JDX1. And another video that I just started working on will detail an incident in 1981 when a Russian submarine got stuck in Swedish waters armed with nuclear weapons, and how that almost, well, it was like, what, 60 seconds from starting a war between Sweden and the Soviet Union. Fascinating story. So that's up and coming sometime in the future. And yeah, well, enough ranting from me. Have a good one. Go på marsch, Ukraine.